So today we are doing another talk with Matt, and we're readdressing points that were brought up last time. I didn't realize at the time, I probably should have, but there was a lot of stuff that Matt got wrong in the previous talk that was done. There was some blog posts made, there was some angry comments on Mastodon, I got a couple of things wrong as well, and Matt is basically here again today to go over these points. I think most of what was brought up are completely valid points. I do think there was a little bit taken out of context just because the author was already angry, but we'll get to that as we talk. So here is the recording. Welcome back. So
thank you.
Yeah, today Matt's back here again. For anyone who sensibly does not use social media, which is very healthy for you, I would recommend continuing to do that. After the last interview that we put out, there were frankly a lot of things that were said wrong. I should have picked up on some stuff that I missed, and I did say a couple of things that were wrong myself. But a lot of what was said in that annoyed some Flathub people, so there were blog posts written about it, and Matt's back on here to sort of just, I guess, explain.
Well, yeah, I want to start by apologizing, I think.
Yeah, go on to what you want to say.
I think I've been annoyed. I think I, hurt some people's feelings. And it's a small team that works on this really big, important project.
Mm-hmm.
And to have somebody, like they felt, trash it. I wasn't intending to trash it. I was my intention was to go back in time and explain where the Fedora Flatpaks came from.
Mm-hmm.
And in doing that, I definitely painted with too broad of a brush, and I was trying to do pros and cons, but I kind of leaned pretty heavily on the one side because I was trying to, defend and explain that.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things, because this, we started doing the Fedora Flatpaks in, I think, 2018 or something. So before the blip, it's prehistory. So some of the things that were the reasons for doing it back then aren't necessarily the same as they were now. And I did talk a little bit about the world changing in there, but I want to emphasize that more. So yeah, there were some things that I was wrong about, and I know it's hard to be wrong on the internet, but I've done it before. So here we are again. Some of the things were out of date or based on something just, a little that I hadn't caught up on. And then, yeah, again, I painted too broad of a brush. And I think I may have used some language that I didn't think of as negative, but could be taken that way, especially with the rest of the context. So I apologize for all of that. There are some things that I was right about as well. And
yeah, one thing I do want to get into before we get into the main point is feel free to write a public blog post about anything wrong said on my channel, but can you at least tell me that something was said wrong? Because I didn't find out that anyone took any issue with that until maybe at least an entire day later, when somebody random else tagged me, they're like, "Hey Brodie, did you know you're in a drama?" No, actually I had no idea. So I know some people don't like to drag the person they're talking about into drama. Please drag me into it. I want to know about it so I can actually do something about it.
I'd prefer no drama, but
Sure.
Since I was partially to blame for causing the drama, I guess I'll take it.
Well, I think the first place to start is regarding the title, where it was the Fedora project leader is willfully. Actually, before we get to that, the blog post that we're talking about here was written by Jordan Petridis, and we have another one here on the Flathub website from Cassidy James, sort of going over the way that Flathub works. But the main point of contention is the one that Jordan wrote, basically going over all of the things that were said wrong. The title of that article is "The Fedora Project Leader is Willfully Ignorant About Flathub." And I don't know. I don't think you were willfully ignorant. I think you were just wrong.
Good enough at being regularly see, look at that. Regularly ignorant all by myself. I don't have to go out of my way to be willfully. So yeah. It was not intentional.
Okay, so I think the first actual point to start on then is regarding the Flathub review process. This is a big point that was hit on a couple of times. Let me find the exact quote in here. Review. So You were basically saying that FlightHub's review guidelines were fairly lax. And this is apparently something that a lot of people have spread around in a lot of places out there. And I don't know what it was like back in, the very early days of FlightHub. I don't know if that's what led you to that path or how we got there.
No, actually, it's that part is more of a miscommunication. I shouldn't have said lax because that can have negative connotations. I didn't really mean it that way.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't really go into what they have, which has definitely been more developed since I last looked. And actually, they have some really amazing automated checking, which Fedora could learn from. We have some similar things, but they're not nearly as well developed or integrated. And we have we have some automated checks that we don't gate on, which basically makes them useless. So a lot of our checks are done by humans. We're a much bigger project and have a lot more people who spend their time doing those kind of things.
Mhm.
But I think the important thing, from my point of view, isn't that the check. I didn't mean that the checks are bad or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, I meant that the checks are different
Mhm. Mhm.
because they are mostly concerned with the correctness of the packaging,
Sure.
whereas stuff is
Like ensuring it
concerned
has
with
the correct permissions, ensuring it has correct dependencies, things like that.
right. And that and really like the metadata is exactly right and right formatted that it'll look good in an app store. That like those things are definitely well covered, and it's long and it is longer than the requirements.
Mhm.
But I was talking to some of the FlatHub people in the Matrix channel today here, so I'm sure I'm right about this. Um, everything. So this is something. Well, actually, let me go back and talk about security first,
Mhm.
because I think that's also part of the thing. I talked about things being insecure, and I've worked with computers for a long time. There's an old sysadmin joke that to secure a computer, you unplug it from the network, and then the power, and then you drop it in the ocean, and now you've got a secure computer,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So there's always trade-offs between various the completely secure thing and various other benefits, ease of use for the users, for the people working on it, costs, all those kind of things. So I'm talking about some things that are security trade-offs, which you can argue on the importance of.
Mhm.
Um, so one of those things is everything in Fedora is buildable from Fedora Linux itself.
Right.
And so there are no dependencies that come from the outside. Everything is built with no network access.
Mhm.
So the FlatHub system has everything built with no network access, but there's a stage before that where dependencies are pulled down from wherever, from
Mhm.
PyPy, from cargo, whatever different kind of thing your language uses from Git repo somewhere.
Mhm.
Now that those are all then checked against the manifest. So there's a good check that makes sure that the things that are pulled down to build with are the things that are expected, which is
Sure,
a
they make
good.
user checksums, things like that.
Yeah. But those things themselves, and we know a lot of those repositories out there are not nearly as again strict as Fedora about this must have been built from source. There's no binary that got copied into this.
Mhm.
There's no bits of it that actually aren't open source in there. There's no bits that were built from source once a while ago, and then now we got to pack it. Like there's things can be messy, and
Right, for better
so
or worse, Fedora is very particular about not doing
yeah,
proprietary applications in like their core repos.
yeah, and not just proprietary. There's like so it used to be fairly common, and I was talking again. This is way back in the old days, right?
Mhm.
Like it would be fairly common to have like you'd have your application that you wrote with the source code there, and then there'd be some libraries that were precompiled for your convenience or
Mhm.
whatever. And sometimes those precompiled libraries didn't have all the source that came with them, and even though it was open source and you're supposed to be source code, it wasn't.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And I think actually over the years, a lot of distribution strictness about that has, and also just better practices in general, has made that less common. But it's still kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And so for better for worse, yeah, and this is what I meant by stricter or more relaxed.
Mhm.
Fedora has much harder guidelines about what goes in and where it comes from. So when we say there's no network access, there's no network access used in any of the build things. Everything is
Mhm.
already there. And so uh, you could, and this is, this gets more esoteric into forensics, but if you wanted to find, Fedora build from 10 years ago, you can find the build, find the sources. You can actually, we have all that stuff. Whereas in FlatHub, they have some of the history, which is important and can track it, but they don't actually have that source. So, if GitHub goes down, we could still rebuild Fedora Linux. Will
Sure.
GitHub? Probably not, but that's one of the principles and one of the things that we do in making Fedora, and so that comes through in the Flatpaks as well.
So regarding, unless you're going to say something, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Yeah, another area where we're more strict, I think, is architecture coverage. So we build in Fedora for RPMs. We build for x86 64, ARch64, starting to build for RISC-V. That's getting spun up.
That's cool.
PowerPC LE and S390X. Right.
Okay, sure.
So those are some esoteric architectures there as well. And so if you have a PowerPC LE desktop, like Fedora packages
Like
are
some
there.
people, yeah.
And so as long as somebody cares about doing those things, we'll do them. And we actually build all of the packages unless there's something that's really architecture specific, and we block on not doing that. Whereas again, I called it more developer friendly or developer decision making here. FlatHub basically lets the developers decide if they want to, what architectures they want to build for.
Sure.
So that's fine. It's a trade-off of different things, but it's one of the ways that Fedora is different and Fedora Flatpaks are different.
Now, I do want to hit on that. Oh, and I was going to say I wanted to hit on that point of strictness because I know someone's going to jump on that otherwise. There was it was part of that blog post, a comment from a Red Hat guy. I don't know how to say his name. Jerry? I'm not sure how to say this. Sorry. It's got a...
It's very hard to say because that sound is the Czech rolled R sound. That is pretty hard to say if you haven't grown up with it.
But you know what I'm talking about. You've seen the comment, yeah? Okay. For anyone who is maybe just listening to this, I maintain applications both in FlatHub and Fedora repositories, and I find it more demand to keep the apps in FlatHub than in the Fedora repos. Actually, ever since I got the Fedora repo, the Fedora packages through the review process to the repos, no one has cared what I'm doing with them. Meanwhile, in FlatHub, I've already received several requests to remove problematic things in the manifest, update to the latest guidelines, etc., and a hard stop by the build system, so unless I made the changes or filed a ticket and explained why I needed it, I could not maintain the app anymore.
Yeah, so I do feel like, I'm actually surprised more people didn't call me out for throwing stones from a glass house. But not everything is perfect in Fedora in how we do things, and there's really too heavyweight in a gating things at the beginning and then trusting the packagers after that to keep things up to date. Which there it is. And I think that's one of the, like I said, we could really learn from it. FlatHub's automation around this is really, really amazing and slick. And they do a lot of things where they, rebuild and test with new updates and they constantly, which is very cool. But again, that strictness is around mostly the metadata and those kind of things, not what goes into it. And that's, again, also, it's not bad that on either side, that difference. It is just a philosophical difference of how the things are packaged.
So just so people are on the same page here, Fedora is a lot stricter when it comes to letting people put things on the repo. That is a more involved process. So it's very heavy with the, I guess, trust initially, and then once you have that trust, you just have to not break the trust. Whereas FlatHub, it's easier to get an application onto it, but because more people are allowed to do so, they put less trust in each individual maintainer and do a lot more testing as the package goes.
Well, there's still a lot of trust on the what goes in part.
Sure.
The checks are mostly, man, so correct me if I've misunderstood something here, but as I understand, the checks are mostly on the validity of the packaging and that all of that stuff is nice and done well. And obviously, absolutely, I want to make sure I'm not saying that there's not checks for maliciousness and things like that. And yeah, they don't want anything bad to be in.
Sure, yeah.
Check for those kind of things, but just that practice of having everything built from one source repository, that we have the whole thing together rather than things that come from, um, wherever. And usually wherever is pretty well respected, places that people are pulling their language runtime libraries from all the time. But we know from experience in packaging those in Fedora that those places do not have consistent standards that are the same as ours. So um, that's kind of where I got into the like calling it the Wild West kind of thing, which is that's way too far. It's not a Wild West situation, but it is, again, more relaxed in what is allowed to be in content, even with the checks and all of that.
Now, if you want to call something the Wild West, arguably you'd call the AUR that. Even the AUR has some level of moderation there. If something is actively malicious, like, they will still remove it. It's just the requirements to get onto the AUR basically are, do you know how to make an AUR account, and do you know how to use Git?
Right. Yes, they are much, 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 much more stringent than that. Continuum in some ways.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing is regarding the verified applications. And this is the first place in the article I do think there was pretty much, I do think it was kind of taken way out of context. So what you said is the thing that says verified just says that it's verified from the developers themselves, and Jordan goes into saying, well, it still has to meet the requirements and all of that stuff. And yes, it still has to meet the requirements, but correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I understood what you were saying there is basically a verified application is something that the developers effectively just say, this is our application. We're okay with this being associated with us.
Yeah. Flathub has verified that the real upstream developer is the person who is responsible for the packaging and the manifest on Flathub. That's what I meant, and I didn't go back and listen to myself again, but they didn't intend to say anything different from that, so that got misread.
Yeah, I understand how we got there, because, by this point, I'm sure Jordan was already quite annoyed. He probably watched the entire episode by that point and went back and wrote the blog afterwards. I get how you're going to interpret things in the most negative way possible when there are a bunch of other things which legitimately were wrong.
Yeah, and again, Fedora doesn't do that for anything. So it's that is an added thing that Flathub has that is actually kind of nice.
Yeah.
It just people. I've seen people assume too much from the word verified, and it's hard to get these kind of things right. Maybe that complaint didn't even belong in this topic, because it's kind of irrelevant, really.
Yeah, I've got my own complaints about the verified system. I've got my own complaints about the way they display permissions to the user. Basically 90% of, maybe it's not 90. There's a lot of stuff on Flathub where it's marked as potentially dangerous, and I know why it's like that. I just don't agree with the framing of it.
Yeah, I think the reason I think that the verified thing fits into it for me is, I see it as the verification that it came from the developer is important, because that's what that developer to user conduit is the point.
Sure.
Whereas the distro is more about providing a polished, consistent thing to the end user, and we like to work with upstreams. That's the upstream first thing in Fedora. We don't want to have a hostile relationship with any of our upstream projects. Sure. But we are also building a whole unified system for people. Yeah, and I do want to talk about the future a little bit at the end of this, but let's go through this.
He does mention there's not that many verified applications in distros. We did touch on that already. The only cases where there are verified apps is in the very rare context that there is a package maintainer in the project who happens to work on that software as well. And there are also cases where a package isn't available in the repos, and then it's made by the developers. Like OBS, they have an official PPA, for example, for their distribution of OBS, but that's fairly rare to see that.
Yeah, and I think that's this is basically a problem that Flatpak solves because uh, back, if there were only one distro packaging mechanism,
Mhm.
then I think uh, we've invited upstreams to come package things in Fedora for a long time, but
Mhm. Mhm.
um, if you have to do that for 5 different distros with all with different rules, and if some of the things that Fedora is asking, like these strict build from source requirements and all that, those things are hard,
Mhm.
and splitting out dependencies and a lot of things. We've set a fairly high barrier for developers to do that, and so not a lot of people have shown up. And I think that FlatHub has done a really good job of getting developers to really show up, and so
Mhm.
that's cool. Good for them.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, let's see. Oh, regarding and this is something that Jordan did add to the post afterwards, regarding the script that you talked about that was available on FlatHub, that was hardware probe. Apparently, you'd made a post about this on the discourse 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean this was a while ago, and the response I got back right away was like, "Yeah, that's not a problem."
Mhm.
And as you can see there, eventually the developer was like, "Oh no, that is a problem. I don't want to do it that way."
Mhm. Mhm.
But I got a taste in my mouth from the um, just that response of like, "Oh yeah, not working as designed." Um, and again, this is like sort of the problem we have with OBS. I don't really know or remember if that person who replied to me had any sort of official voice or anything important there at all, and I
Mhm. Mhm.
probably didn't take it that strictly. And I have been assured that that kind of thing is much more carefully looked for now, and that wouldn't have gotten through now.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's cool. That's good.
Right, because that was back in 2021. So I know that there's been a lot of, trying to improve FlatHub as they try to bring in their payment system, as they brought in the verification system, as they've just generally improved the platform. So I don't think anyone would disagree with me that as the years have gone by, the level of testing they do, the level of checking they do, has improved. So things that may not have been caught in those earlier days of FlatHub would likely be caught now.
Yeah, and I think it's also just a like what's considered bad. You can be stricter on what's considered bad, whether it's caught or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Uh, okay, so okay, this sort of goes back to what I was saying at the start regarding the title. One thing that Jordan said in here is, um, this is pure slander and defamation coming from the current Fedora project leader and technically voice of Fedora.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be slandering or mean or and I think FlatHub is great. I
Mm,
think Flatpak is the future of packaging for applications, not for everything else, but for applications. For a desktop, I think it's really the way to go,
mm,
and that's part of why I care about this so much. I think that it's important that we succeed, and
mm,
that kind of gets into a deeper thing that I found kind of interesting. People were like, I don't care if you package it up in an RPM, but if
mm,
you package it in a flat pack, that flat pack should be going through FlatHub.
mm,
Um, it's possible, and this is speculative for the future, that we will decide in Fedora that we don't want to package everything up in an RPM, and that we would like to go directly to Flatpak from the manifests, maybe using a similar build system to what FlatHub does,
mm, mm,
um, but still have that consistent across the distro build requirements, have those kind of things that are there that are I think the philosophical differences. So I don't feel like just don't do flat packs is really the right answer there, because there is those things that we do that I think provide value to the whole ecosystem.
mm,
In fact, when I was talking to the people on the Matrix channel, I was giving some of the examples of some of the problematic upstream things, like like mislabeled licenses and stuff like that.
yeah.
And someone said, "Well, the distros will catch that." And yeah, so like that's exactly the value. We don't catch everything, but we do catch a lot of stuff like that because we go through it. I guess in a nitpicky way. Let's say I'll use a negative word on this side, right?
Mm, mm,
Which FlatHub doesn't really see as their business. I think.
sure.
Okay. Say. Um, yeah.
Well, in that vein, there's some stuff that the distros do that I don't really see any reason why couldn't be done in FlatHub as well, like the license checking and things like that. It's just a matter of resources and testing and actually having systems in place to make it happen. Like, there's no reason why it has to be done by the distros and couldn't be done on FlatHub as well.
A lot of the license check stuff could definitely be automated, but some of it is also like it's hard to automate. And
Sure,
so
yeah. If there's if the license file isn't named license, you might not be checking the right location. Maybe they do licenses per code file or per section of the code base, which I've definitely seen before, and it can get harder to automatically check that.
Or, if it's a license, it's something that says everybody, you need to retain credit for people, and credit's been stripped out of the files. It's hard to scan for negative, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Which a human check will catch. So I think I'm all for scaling things with automation. There's some things where humans looking at it does add another layer of value, I guess.
This wasn't a criticism of what we said before, but I do think there is certainly something interesting that's happened regarding FlatHub, like with it becoming the central place to get Flatpaks. Because this is one of the criticisms that people have of snaps, that the Snap Store is the place that you get snaps. But effectively, the same thing has happened with FlatHub. It's just happened in a more grassroots way. Rather than it being you are forced to use the Snap Store, it's everybody just chooses to use FlatHub.
Yeah. I want to not get myself in trouble by now saying something bad about a whole nother set of people who aren't currently mad at me. But yeah, it is an interesting thing. And I think that's one of the things I think it's healthy for there to be something other than FlatHub where you can get packages.
Actually, sorry, one thing, just before anyone does get picky with me, I know that I know Alan Pope has made technically a way to use another store. It's just it's not exactly intended by Snap. The way you're supposed to use Snap is the Snap Store. You can add in as many Flatpak stores as you want to. Just before anyone jumps on me for that one.
Yeah, and I think I expect the FlatHub people to be good stewards of that central thing, and I understand that they're in the process of setting up a foundation, and it's going to be very important how that foundation is set up, because being the gateway there, and especially when money comes into it, like that's a pretty powerful motivator for going from don't be evil to well, maybe a little bit, right? And I don't think anybody wants to do that or intends that, and I think that it will be structured in a good way. But like that centralization has some danger to it, as all the people who are on Mastodon to yell at me, might know. Like there's some strengths in decentralization, and but there are also some big strengths to the central model. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is the donate button for upstream, for the projects. I think that's a really interesting experiment, because we've never really had a place where people could easily do that before and know that the money was going to the right places. So if they can pull that off in a way that feels good to everybody, I think that's really interesting. I don't envy them the work when all of the grifters and scammers show up to try and take advantage of that. But I think there are some very smart, capable people involved. So it'll really be interesting to see. One of the things I would love to see as part of that is, I'm sure that there will be some processing fraction, for the foundation and the work, and to support FlatHub. That totally makes sense to have, that little bit of overhead there. I would also like to see some fraction of it go, and I don't know exactly how it would be distributed, but to the dependencies of that package, because all of these things, there's no open source, there's no software in the world today that's built, by somebody just from the ground up, except for hobby projects, right? Like you don't build software from the ground up. Why would you? Open source has won, and code reuse is a thing. So all these, everybody's seen the XKCD Jenga blocks thing about this. It would be nice if the FlatHub donations could also include some fund that would help support those
Mm.
developers who are doing the underlying work, which is enabling the applications to happen. Um, this is unrelated to Fedora, unrelated, really, but I just think that would be a cool thing to see. And I think that having, a central place that does that, there's a lot of strength to that.
Yeah, this is
Um,
a discussion I've had with the open printing guy that I'm forgetting the name of. Sorry, I completely forgot his name. The main open printing guy.
I do not remember the name either, but I know who you're talking about.
Yes, yes. So I talked about this regarding, like, Thunderbird having their donation system, KDE having their donation system, and when you're a big graphical application that appears in front of the user, it's very easy to have a way to fund the application. Or, you're a Fedora. If Fedora wanted to, they could, during the installation process, or during the update process, have a big donate button that everybody is going to see. But if you're, like, libxyz, right? Like, how do you tell people that you exist in a way that isn't just every single library putting trying to, like, spawn a pop-up window?
Right? Yeah. I mean, there are thousands of libraries that are used to just get to a simple desktop. Like the amount of people who are doing living work on the things underneath it is staggering.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, not everybody has the ability to do a pop-up thing. And so I do think that developers deserve while we're living in capitalism, which we are, people should be able to get money for
Yeah.
their work, their labor, right? That's the system. And I think should be true of open source as well. There's not been a good model for open source applications ever. So I think that's really interesting. But that's just kind of hitting that visible layer, and there's so much more work underneath it that I don't know how to
Yeah.
make happen. So I think FlatHub may be in a place where they could do that. Just a
I
suggestion. I suggested that to some of the FlatHub folks before, so I'll
I would
just
be surprised
repeat
if
it
they
here.
weren't already thinking about it, but yeah, no, I do agree. It's just a very hard problem to solve.
Yeah, but they're kind of in a place. They've got all these dependencies. They've got some of the metadata there. Like they're in a place to maybe figure that out and figure out what things actually are the most popular underlying things here from what's being downloaded and so on.
Mm-hmm. Let me see here. Okay. I guess this kind of goes back into sort of just the stance you took on FlatHub. One thing in here brought up by Jordan is kind of like you having a conflict of interest in discussing the difference between Fedora Flatpak and Flathub. He felt like it was sort of, you're in a position where you sort of wanted to raise Fedora Flatpak above what the alternative was. That's sort of the way he was trying to frame it here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's not untrue. I wanted to defend why we were doing Fedora Flatpaks in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously some of that perspective is going to come in there. I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to ever be neutral about Fedora.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do really think that Fedora provides value. That doesn't mean that FlatHub and Flatpak doesn't, they provide value too. It's just different. And
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I was maybe a little too negative in how I presented some of the contrast there.
Mm-hmm. Here's one thing that I completely missed on. I don't know why I said this. Regarding permissions, when we were talking about permissions, I completely forgot about the existence of portals, and we were just talking about the
No,
static permission system.
yeah, I hope I did mention portals because
I feel like you
I
might have, but I'm completely
yeah,
I'm not remembering it at all.
yeah. And I've talked. I don't know the percentage of this, but not very many applications are using portals. And this is where I talked to like the leverage situation. Like, how do we get applications to move to using that? It's not the same as Apple or uh, Google, who have here's the platform.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that if there was only one platform, there might be some more strength for that. I can see the argument there. Um,
I would assume the rate of
but
portal usage is considerably high when we look at the verified applications, though. I don't know
yeah,
if
that
I don't know if they if in the manifest they track what portals are used, but this is something they probably, if they do track it, I would like to see the numbers on that.
Yeah, that I should have asked what the exact numbers are, but there's a lot of applications that don't, and yeah, it's both. So they do check when static permissions change as well. So this is something that I don't know was this is what I was wrong about, but yeah, for most case, like this is and so I want to make this clear. This is not really like this is nothing to do with Fedora Flatpaks versus FlatHub Flatpaks,
Mhm.
because the issue to me is the presentation in the operating system, and something we need to figure out an answer to, because it's not easily clear what permissions an app has, and how to deal with them. And there's the flat seal and some of those kind of things,
Mhm.
but those get into like nerdy level management of it.
Mhm.
So I don't know how to find that. I'm like I said, I'm not a UX designer. I don't know how to find that balance there, but it would be nice to see more presentation of things um, in the OS. I mean, GNOME or KDE or however else you're using it.
Yeah,
Or
this is kind of related to another point that you brought up, is the idea of the Linux ecosystem, and he argues that there is no a Linux ecosystem. It's people targeting platforms like GNOME and KDE, and that is true. Or in the case of portals, you're targeting portals, and yeah, like we have a very there is obviously a Linux platform in a more meta sense, but it's not like Windows, where if you're targeting Windows, you know exactly what you're targeting. But if or Mac or Android, but on Linux, there
yeah,
are these different
it,
environments that exist that are sort of their own sub-platforms.
arguably for a lot of things, the platform is Electron, um, which really gets back to a problem we have in Fedora, and
Mm,
it's actually illustrates the difference.
mhm,
We don't know how to package Electron apps in Fedora because those come as bundles, and nobody who's doing Electron apps recompiles Electron from source. Like that's a big bunch of blobs that come along with it,
mhm.
and so Flatpak, FlatHub, there's Electron apps there because that's allowed. In
Sure.
Fedora, that's very against our rules, and so we haven't figured out how to do that. That's a example of where being more relaxed is probably okay. I mean, there's probably plenty of insecurities in those FlatHub, whatever. Sorry, leaving FlatHub out of it. Just the Electron apps are probably full of insecurities, but the amount of damage, like the risk and damage, it's probably a pretty low number and probably doesn't really matter.
Mhm.
But yeah, we don't, there's our friends at Red Hat have Podman Desktop, which is an Electron app, and we don't even know how to package that up properly. So get that from FlatHub.
Well, on the
I
note of
imagine,
oh,
yeah,
sorry, go on.
keep forever. So go ahead and interrupt.
I was gonna say on the note of Electron applications, something that is open source. I don't know if Fedora has. Is there a package that you guys have for Element, the Matrix client? Because that's Electron, and obviously has that problem.
Right? Yeah. No, we don't. That's uh, because yeah, we if we would have it, we would want to build it all for source, and that's just not doable with that. I'm hoping that Servo really actually catches on. I wish Firefox Mozilla had invested in that, because like it's a much more
Mhm.
lightweight buildable runtime that can do the same thing. Um, I'll hold out hope. You're laughing at me, but we need something like that.
No, there
Electron
are a
is
couple of alternatives
so
to Electron that
heavyweight, and
exist. It's just Electron is it's Electron, right? Like it's so big that trying to get into that space and get big applications to move to it is very tough.
yes, yes. My wife was like, "Why is my computer so slow at my store?" Well, it's because you've got Spotify and one other thing running. So too much, too many things. Um,
Yeah. Sorry. Let me see if I can find it. What is it? Let me see. Electron alternative. What was the one I was? Okay, there's actually a bunch of them. I don't
yeah,
remember what the one I was thinking of was.
Servo is the one that was written originally at
Cowrie.
Mozilla and then spun off.
Cowrie is what I was thinking of.
Okay. Servo is written in Rust and therefore cool. So
I'm surprised that with like the boom in Rust, Servo hasn't gotten a lot more attention. obviously the web's a very hard problem.
It's really hard to do, yeah. And it's so complicated, so big, and changing all the time.
Yeah.
But it also is a nice platform to develop for, and so people are used to that. And there's a lot of frameworks and different things. So yeah, I understand why that is a common platform. This is a whole huge tangent. Um,
Let me see. Oh, okay. So this goes into the OBS thing. So you agree that Fedora should be respecting application developers' wishes to not have their application distributed by Fedora, but if you are going to, they should be renamed. But Jordan's contention here is when developers try to approach this topic, there are some that feel like they've been ridiculed or laughed at, and their opinions aren't really taken seriously. Whether it's OBS, whether it's Bottles, which Bottles have made a really big deal out of this as well, and I don't know, what is sort of your stance here? Do you think there could be more done from the Fedora side and maybe better approaching here? Like,
no one should be ridiculed or laughed at. It's maybe worth noting that when we talk to the OBS people, they're happy to have distros package their stuff, and they like as long as they just want to make sure things work and that bugs get reported to the right place and all of those things. But they are not opposed to distro packaging at all. I think it's a complicated thing, and like I said before, as things are, the world has changed from the release of open source applications being something dumped on an FTP server to developers who really want that conduit, as close to the user as possible. And I think that everyone in the ecosystem today has good intentions on that. I do think that in the future, if this is a wildly successful and there's all this monetary possibilities and things, there's going to be more bad actors coming into it, and that'll be, I don't know, an interesting thing as well.
Sure, like there's already been cases of fake crypto apps being available on the Snap Store, for example.
Possibly.
No, this is something that actually has been. This has happened. It's been reported. They were taken down like basically immediately. But this has been a problem that Snap did have in the past.
Yeah. And there are things that are less egregious than that people might disagree on. I do think that one of the fundamental things of open source is you have the ability to take it and rebuild it and do your own builds of it and do redistribute and all of those things. And generally, I think, like we said, like we will use the Fedora trademark if people are using Fedora, rebuilds of Fedora in a way that doesn't fit with what Fedora is. But we would also love it for people to say, "Hey, I'm using Fedora for this," when it is something that kind of does fit. So I think if we got into a world where everybody was like, if you want to build this in a distro, you have to rename it, that would be a mess.
Sure.
So I don't want to get there. But I do think that, in most cases, when it's in good faith, it's very possible that model of letting the application developers worry about the applications is the way to go. But there are a lot of people in Fedora who, really feels that strongly about the value that Fedora has traditionally added by doing the application packaging, and I don't want to give that up. I don't want to lose that, I guess. Give that up sounds too clingy. But so, yeah, I don't know what the future is. This may be something, for the next FPL to help the project come to terms with. I think there are some people who think that it would be best if we just focus on the core operating system and make that as slick as possible. But it's always been kind of fuzzy where the core is exactly and where the boundaries are.
You raise a good point there about ensuring people are reporting bugs to the correct location. I think this is a problem that every distro has. I don't think there's a single one that does this well. They all do this badly in different ways, but letting users know firstly, they can report bugs to the distro and how to report bugs to the distro. Like, I use Arch. Arch has the problem of they've had spam issues on their issue tracker, so you have to, like, manually ask them to get an account. Fedora, there's a lot of things in Fedora. It's difficult to find where you need to go. I wouldn't even have a clue what to do with Debian.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone does this really well.
Yeah, and I think we could have a whole talk about bugs and bug reporting. I think we use bugs for too many different things. We use a bug tracker for a whole bunch of things that are all actually different. And I think for user problems, the first place to go is Ask Fedora. Ask.fedoraproject.org will take you there. And even if you think you know what the problem is, like raising it there with, hey, has anybody else seen this? That can help get it to the right place. Because if it is something where, oh, there's an actual upstream bug that's clearly exposed, like you are, if you feel comfortable talking to the upstreams, like it's just putting somebody in the middle and slowing things down. If you're talking to the distro where you can go right to the original. On the other hand, it could be something that is a Fedora specific problem, or maybe the very newest kernel, there's some issue with, or something like that.
I think it's
So
less about the resources existing and more about how to present them to the user and like how to make it so users actually know that is the first place they should be going, or one of the places they should be looking. Because it's all well and good, for there to be the Ask Fedora, or for a project to have a Bugzilla or something, but how do you get to the user that this is the place you should be going?
yeah, and in some ways that's a UX design thing, maybe a marketing thing, a docs thing. We could probably do better at all of those.
Let me see. Is there anything else major here to hit on? Oh, it's regarding the trademark thing, and one of the points Jordan brought up is a project shouldn't have to go as far as making sure their trademark is filed, because there's a lot of projects where frankly they just don't really want to go that far, and then have to like threaten legal action, and like he felt like there was a lot of additional steps here that really nobody wanted to have happen. Like I don't think Fedora wanted this to happen. OBS clearly didn't want this to happen, and if you're a small project, like you're not an OBS, you're just a single developer. Doing that's like way harder.
Yeah, and I think that is part of like there's a lot of sprawl in Fedora, and it's hard to find the right place to ask those kind of things. It wasn't that we didn't care or anything, and that like a legal threat was necessary to get action. It just we messed that up, and we could do better on that.
Sure. Is there anything else you want to hit on? Maybe something that you want to add? Maybe something we missed?
I think we covered most of the things. We talk about out of date runtimes a little bit, but that's probably someone showed some statistics where there actually are a lot of applications that are using out of date runtimes. This again goes to that security concern thing, like how bad is it to use an out of date runtime? Usually, probably not really a problem, but it's something that we're very careful about in Fedora space. We want to move things uniformly to the latest version of everything, which again, pluses and minuses, because as people have pointed out, sometimes moving to the newer version of something breaks it, and then that's not great for end users. So we try to fix those things, but sometimes not fast
And I guess
enough.
that's kind of the difference with approaching it from a distro model, where with the distro, you typically will provide, GCC or libxyz, and then things that need that library, they're going to be built against that version. Whereas on Flathub, they can be built against an older runtime, if that's what the developers think is the best thing to get the application working.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I learned, and I think I'm saying this right here, that they're actually fairly strict about that for new things coming in. Like you can't just run when something new comes in. And they also really try to get, to test things, to update them. There's I've forgotten the word. So in addition to the runtime, they've got another like set of shared other common things that are extensions or something that can be added into the Flatpaks, which I think is also a really good way to reduce a lot of the potential problems here.
Mhm.
But yeah, you once it's there, you can keep using an out-of-date runtime with the perfectly good justification of it might break my app if I move forward, so I don't want to.
Mhm.
Um, but that's something that we don't do in the Fedora space. So you can at least, again, not always perfectly, but you know that we can tell that we're trying to make sure that everything is the latest.
Sure.
And I won't, yeah, I won't try to argue for you know, the vast importance of the security of that, because it's a trade-off kind of thing.
Sure. Like if the older runtime doesn't have any known like vulnerabilities or any known vulnerabilities that are exploitable in the application, there's not really any security difference you can really argue there. It's not like, if a runtime has the XZ vulnerability, that's a whole different situation. But if we're just talking, well, it's a slightly different older version and there's no vulnerability that can be exploited.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I think that we've shown over the last 20 years that keeping things the latest is generally the best way to keep things secure,
Mhm.
even if that does sometimes, like the XC thing, almost went in because of the new updates comes quickly. But that was caught basically in time.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I do think that keeping things up to date is valuable, and
Mhm.
at least one of the things that having them up to date in Fedora Linux does help us find places where there's compiler bugs and all those sort of things, whatever it might happen in the newer releases, and hopefully get those things fixed
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
quickly as possible so that everybody can have a good experience in Fedora and everywhere else.
Mhm. Okay. Is that pretty much everything then? Nothing else you can think of? Or we just need to
Uh,
keep cycling
yeah,
through
we're
we get to
recycling
the
again. I
end like,
mean,
hey, you got anything? Hey, you got
yeah,
anything?
yeah, that was a little bit jumping back. I think one thing I just want to jump back and get, like, I think the Flat Hub people are great. I like Flatpak. I
Mhm.
love Flatpak. Man, I'm getting tongue twisted. Um, Flat Hub is great. People working on it are amazing. Um, Flatpak, great. I think I'm really sorry that people felt hurt and that it caused more drama than I meant.
Mhm.
Um, I I don't know what the future will be like. I think we have reasons for doing the Fedora flat packs, and we're going to keep doing those as well as we can, and maybe try and find places where we could do better so that we don't have the kind of problems that are causing these issues. But yeah, as the world continues to change, who knows what the future of those kind of things looks like.
Mhm. As for me, I am very much a big fan of Flatpak. In the case of there being a official application from the developers, it's verified application. This is the thing that they say is our application. For the most part, I will go and use that. I don't use FlatHub for everything. Like if there's just some random dev that's made something, I'm not going to use it for that. But for OBS, things like that, that's usually what I will go with because again, like because I use Arch, it's kind of hard to report things to the distro unless I go through the forums and things. It's a bit weird. So I like to be able to report things to the developers, and being on the thing that they officially support just makes that easier.
Yeah, I think the major thing that is not those are proprietary applications, which for convenience someone has packaged up in a bundle there.
Mhm. Mhm.
And since we have to, I've got to use Zoom for things sometimes, right? Like, I appreciate that somebody did that, even if I don't even know. Maybe the Zoom is an official one. I haven't actually checked. I'm assuming it's not. Um,
Let's find out right
Look,
now. Zoom
like,
flat.
I'll find
I
another
think you're
example.
probably right. It is obviously not verified yet.
Yeah, thankful to the person who did that, and that's something we're never going to do in Fedora. Um, but I guess I would kind of like to see um, everything on FlatHub be verified, or else be in this special case, and even have those special case things be separated out, because um, make it clear what you're getting in. what you expect. But
Yeah,
that's
there's a
not
lot
a
of
big.
people on FlatHub who agree with that as well, or at least in the downstreams that are very heavily involved in FlatHub. There's obviously talk of some GNOME Fedora people wanting to make it so the only Flatpaks you see from FlatHub are the verified Flatpaks. So it's not like that is a point that nobody agrees with. I think there's a lot of people who would like as much as possible to be verified on FlatHub.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad people agree on it. No, I mean, I've been listening to people too, so I know that is a fairly non-controversial view.
Okay.
So thank you for letting me come on again, and um, apologize where I was wrong. Hopefully, I haven't made as many mistakes this time. If I have still made some,
Time for episode 3.
And yeah, and I'll should come talk to you about some other things sometime too, because this is certainly not the whole world.
Yeah, no, I'd be more than happy to have you back on. Hopefully we can do something over. This is again going to go up on the main channel just because the last one did, but I'd be more than happy to do something again on the other channel, maybe after you're in your new role. You can sort of. I know you've talked about how you want to provide resources to whoever comes in as the new Fedora project leader to sort of get them up to speed, and I'm sure that could be of value to talk about as well at some point.
Yeah, that's gonna be an interesting experience.
Awesome. So if people want to like get involved in Fedora, where can they head for all of that stuff?
The Fedora discussion forum is really the best place, or on Matrix, there's a Join Fedora space. Show up there, make some introductions, and we can help steer you towards somewhere that might be interesting for you to work.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna go about the rest of my day. It is 9:30 a.m. here, so I've got some videos to record,
and it's 6 p.m. here, so end of my day.
Make some dinner or something. Chill for the rest of the night. Whatever you do for the rest of your night.
Exactly. All right. We'll see you later. Bye.